Social Security was not part of the 100 Days package. Roosevelt understood that this is really a big deal, and we need to take our time with this. And he wanted it to be aired before the American people. He wanted to make sure that when it was passed, it wasn't seen as something that was done in a rush, and it wasn't something that the Republicans foisted on the rest of the country. He wanted Americans to embrace this as their Social Security. We think of Social Security as primarily a system of public pensions. But in fact, Social Security Roosevelt was thinking really in terms of security. How you make people secure at a time when they're feeling really insecure. So it included unemployment insurance, it included disability insurance, survivor insurance, and all of this. Okay, so if you look at Roosevelt's experience with Social Security, that would seem to suggest that Barack Obama should not go for health care reform immediately. Deal with the economic crisis. Get yourself set up, establish a level of credibility with the American people. And once you've got that credibility, maybe it means the economy turns around, maybe it means things that are simply stabilized. But once you've got that credibility, then move forward on what might well be the most important piece of structural legislation you will pass. So this is the problem with history, and this is the hard part of placing Barack Obama in history. If he listens to history out of one ear, then he'll say, go for it now, while you've got the opportunity. If he listens to another part of history, he'll say, wait a minute, maybe we better consolidate. Here's the problem with applying history, the past, to the present. Every moment in the present is like some moment in the past. And the more momentous we are at the present, the bigger the deal that's facing us now, then we can find parallels in the past. The trouble is, the parallels are never exact. Everything in the present is like something in the past, but it's also unlike anything that happened before. And the hard part for not simply historians, but citizens, because one of the reasons we historians do what we do is to try to encourage citizens to take responsibility and think about the decisions they're going to make. The hard part is to figure out whether the current moment is more like the past or more unlike the past. Okay, having said that, I will say that the best way we can judge where Barack Obama will fit in history is to take our time, wait and see, and if Glees invites me back 10 years from now, I'll tell you how not only it turned out, but I'll tell you why it had to turn out the way it did turn out. Thank you very much. Now, if I left any of those threads loose, and you want to find out what I meant to say, then feel free to ask. But I have to caution you. I once had a math teacher who, they had a chalkboard, and he used to write with, let's see, he wrote with his right hand, and he had an eraser in his left hand. And he wrote his notes with the right hand, and as soon as he wrote them, he erased them, because he was in a great hurry. And meanwhile, he was speaking. And sometimes the things that he said, didn't match what he was writing on the board. And so somebody asked, well, Professor, when you write one thing and say something else, what are we responsible for? What you said or what you wrote? And he said, well, it's actually a little bit harder than that. You're responsible for what I meant to say, even if I didn't. So, I may have meant to say stuff, and if you want to ask me about it, feel free. Yes?
You talked about Franklin Roosevelt's special ability to connect with the American people, the electorate. Could you also say that Andrew Jackson might have been the first president outside of Washington to do that, and Theodore Roosevelt? Can you categorize presidents as those who were really special in the way they related to the electorate?
I think you can. The question is, can you characterize presidents in their ability to connect with the American people? And I think the answer is yes, you can. And I would argue that those presidents who were politically most successful during their time were the ones who were most successful at making that connection. Now, I have to, and I think it's important that you started with Andrew Jackson, because before Jackson came along, this emotional connection between the president and the American people was much less important. In, let's call it the era of federalism, starting with George Washington, but I would say even continuing through John Quincy Adams, who wasn't a Federalist because the Federalist Party had disintegrated, but carried many of the same attitudes forward from his father, who was a Federalist. There was, in that age, from the 1780s until the 1820s, American voters, and I should point out that American voters were not a majority of the American people by any stretch. In fact, they were not even a majority of adult white males. This was before the age of democracy. But those people who could vote were mostly property owners, and they were willing to vote for people that socially, maybe even intellectually, they considered above them. In fact, they didn't want to vote for their peers. They voted for George Washington, and then they voted for Thomas Jefferson, not because George Washington was like them, or because they thought they were the equal of Thomas Jefferson. They voted for them because these were the best people. And it was accepted that there were the best, and then there were the lesser types, and then there were the ordinary folks. But with Jackson, for the first time, a majority of adult white Americans can vote. And when they did, they increasingly wanted to vote for people, I won't say who were necessarily just like them, but people with whom they could identify in a certain important way. And I would argue that ever since Jackson, this ability of presidents to identify with the American people, or more importantly, the American people to identify with presidents and presidential candidates, has been essential to political success. What was the most serious criticism, or what Republicans hoped would be the most serious criticism of Barack Obama during the election campaign of last fall? There were various things, but the one that I remember, the one that stuck out, was that somehow he was an elitist. And you realize, and you have to think about this for a minute to realize, maybe it's a stretch here because the kid grew up with, no particular advantages, but he did, he got an Ivy League education, he really made something of himself. But it was that Ivy League education that, okay, so he was on the Harvard Law Review. So, well, what Republicans tried to do was portray Barack Obama as out of touch with ordinary Americans. Now, it didn't work and he got elected. But presidents like Jackson, presidents like Theodore Roosevelt, presidents like Franklin Roosevelt, at a particular moment, John Kennedy's an interesting, I don't know if he's exactly an exception to the rule, because he did make a connection with a certain group, but he didn't live long enough, he wasn't president long enough to know how things would really turn out. Ronald Reagan made this connection with the American people. And presidents who can do it find that all sorts of doors are open. Barack Obama has a serious challenge before him. Part of the serious challenge is the state of the American economy. But another part of the serious challenge, and this might sound a little bit odd, because some people might think, wait, this is part of what he's got going for him. No, part of his challenge is dealing with the Democrats in Congress. Because Franklin Roosevelt swept into office with the Democratic Congress on his coattails. And this is one of the reasons that Roosevelt got whatever he wanted out of that Democratic Congress. They knew they owed their majority to him. It was very clear from the moment he became president, from the moment he was elected, he was the leader of the Democratic Party. And because the Democratic Party was far and away the majority party, he was the focus of American politics. But with Barack Obama, he was preceded in Washington by Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate. And so Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader, they can make a credible claim that they're the ones who made Barack Obama possible rather than the other way around. Franklin Roosevelt was the one who made the Democratic majorities in the 1930s possible.